When Dr. Angela Carter, a 34-year-old black physician, returns to the small, tight-knit town of Maplewood, she hopes to honor her late mother's legacy by taking over the family clinic. But Maplewood is not the haven she once knew. Instead, it is a community gripped by fear, divided by skepticism, and overshadowed by the looming presence of the Iron Shadows, a ruthless biker gang whose intimidation tactics threaten to tear the town apart. Angela's arrival is met with whispers of doubt. Can someone who left for the big city truly understand Maplewood's struggles? As the only doctor, she becomes a lifeline for the town, but her principles are put to the test when members of the very gang causing harm come seeking her care. Caught in the crossfire of mistrust and growing violence, Angela faces impossible decisions. Can she heal a town that seems unwilling to heal itself? Can she show compassion to those who deserve it least, while protecting the innocent? And when a surprising act of defiance from within the gang creates cracks in their foundation, Angela must find the courage to lead Maplewood through its most dangerous moment yet. The town of Maplewood was, as Angela Carter remembered it, quiet, nestled among rolling hills, and populated with faces that rarely changed. The streets she had walked as a child now seemed smaller, the houses a little more worn, and the air carried the faint scent of burning wood from chimneys. It was a far cry from the bustling city she had left behind to practice medicine. Yet, standing outside her late mother's clinic, Angela felt an ache that ran deeper than nostalgia. The clinic was modest, a single-story brick building with peeling white paint and a faded sign that read, "Carter Family Practice." It had been her mother's pride, a place where Viola Carter had treated everyone who came through the doors, no matter their circumstances. As Angela stood there, clutching her keys, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her decision to return. She had left Maplewood for medical school with big dreams, fueled by her mother's stories of healing and compassion. Viola had often said, "We do not choose who needs help, Angela. We help because it is who we are." Those words had shaped Angela's path. But coming back to this small town, where whispers of her name already carried skepticism and resentment, was a challenge she wasn't sure she was ready for. Angela unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell of disinfectant lingered faintly, a ghost of her mother's meticulous care. The reception area was simple: a worn leather couch, a wooden desk with an old computer, and a stack of outdated magazines. The exam rooms down the hall were sparse but functional. Viola's framed certificates still hung on the walls, alongside a photo of Angela as a child, grinning beside her mother. "I hope I can live up to this," Angela muttered to herself. She spent the day unpacking supplies, organizing files, and scrubbing every surface until her arms ached. The familiar rhythm of cleaning brought her a sense of calm. But as the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the clinic floor, doubts crept in. Angela had returned to Maplewood to fill a void left by her mother's passing, but the whispers she had overheard in the diner earlier stung. "Did you hear she came back? Thinks she's too good for us, probably. Viola was one of us. Angela, she's been away too long to understand." Their words replayed in her mind, tugging at her confidence. She wanted to believe that she could prove them wrong, but the loneliness of starting over felt suffocating. The next morning, Angela walked to the town square. The air was crisp, and the autumn leaves crunched beneath her boots. She smiled at passers-by, though most only nodded stiffly in return. Maplewood had always been a town of unspoken rules and lingering prejudices. Angela's presence, a young black woman with city credentials, was a ripple in its stagnant waters. At the grocery store, Angela met Erica Johnson, a former classmate. Erica's brown curls framed her kind face, and her toddler clung to her leg. "Angela, is that really you?" Erica exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. Angela's tension eased. "It's me, back for good this time." "Your mom would be so proud," Erica said warmly. "She helped me through some tough times." If you're half the doctor she was, this town is lucky to have you. Angela's chest tightened. Thank you, Erica. That means a lot. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud commotion. Across the street, a group of men in leather jackets and boots swaggered out of the diner. They laughed and shoved each other, their voices echoing off the brick buildings. The largest of them, a man with a shaved head and a scar running down his cheek, shouted something unintelligible, drawing nervous glances from the townsfolk. "The Iron Shadows," Erica whispered, pulling her child closer. "They've been hanging around more lately. Trouble, every one of them." Angela watched as the group sauntered toward their motorcycles, revving their engines loudly before speeding off. A pit formed in her stomach. Angela spent the afternoon seeing her first patients. A boy with a sprained wrist, a farmer with high blood pressure, and an elderly woman in need of her annual checkup. The work was familiar, grounding her in purpose. But as evening fell, the quiet of the clinic was shattered by the roar of engines. Angela peeked out the window to see the Iron Shadows parked outside. Her pulse quickened as she watched them loiter, smoking and laughing. A sharp knock startled her. She opened the door to find the man with the scar standing there, a smirk on his face. "You the new doc?" he asked. "Yes, Dr. Carter," Angela replied, keeping her voice steady. "Scar," he said, pointing to himself. "My buddy got hurt, needs stitches." Angela hesitated, her mind racing. These men had already made the town uneasy, but her mother's words echoed in her memory. "We help because it is who we are." "Bring him in," she said, stepping aside. The injured man, a wiry figure with a swollen eye and a gash on his arm, stumbled into the exam room. Angela worked methodically, cleaning and stitching the wound while ignoring the leering glances from the others waiting in the hallway. "You're good at this," Scar remarked, leaning against the doorframe. Angela didn't respond. She focused on her work, her hands steady despite the tension in the air. When she finished, she handed the man a prescription for antibiotics. "Take these. Keep the wound clean," she said firmly. Scar studied her, his smirk fading. "You're not what I expected." Angela met his gaze. "Neither are you." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Scar chuckled, gesturing for his group to follow him out. "See you around, Doc." When the bikers left, Angela locked the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. The encounter had shaken her, but she felt a glimmer of hope. Scar's parting words weren't a threat, they carried a hint of something else. The next morning, Angela found a bouquet of wildflowers on the clinic's doorstep. There was no note, just the flowers wrapped in a clean white cloth. She picked them up, her mind racing. Someone in this town, perhaps someone unexpected, had shown her kindness. It was a small gesture, but it made the heavy burden on her shoulders feel a little lighter. Angela placed the flowers on the reception desk, a quiet reminder that even in a town filled with skepticism and hostility, there was still room for hope. As the day went on, she noticed a subtle shift in her patients. A few smiled more warmly. A couple of them asked about her life in the city. While the whispers of doubt hadn't completely faded, Angela felt the beginnings of something different: acceptance. Standing in the quiet clinic that evening, Angela looked at the flowers again and smiled. She wasn't her mother. She was herself, with her own path to carve and her own lessons to teach. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. The bouquet of wildflowers stayed on Angela's reception desk, a quiet but potent reminder of unexpected kindness. She had no idea who left them, but they bolstered her resolve to persevere. Each patient who entered her clinic that day made her more determined to prove herself, not through speeches or defiance, but through care and competence. By mid-morning, the waiting room had filled up. Angela moved briskly between exam rooms, her hands steady, her focus sharp. Most patients were polite, if guarded. A few even managed smiles as she thanked them for trusting her. Then came the sound of a child's cries. Angela turned toward the reception area and saw Erica, her old classmate, clutching her 2-year-old son, Joshua. His cheeks were flushed, and his tiny fists waved weakly. "Dr. Carter, I think he has a fever," Erica said, her voice trembling. Angela guided Erica into an exam room. "Let me take a look," she said gently, pulling on gloves. Joshua's breathing was shallow, and his small body radiated heat. Angela's pulse quickened, but she remained calm, remembering her mother's voice. Steady hands save lives. She worked efficiently, taking Joshua's temperature, checking his lungs, and asking Erica questions. "Has he been eating or drinking?" "Not much," Erica replied. "He kept pushing his bottle away." Angela frowned, sensing dehydration. "It looks like he has an infection. I'll start him on fluids right away." Angela set up an IV drip with practiced precision. As the saline solution flowed, Joshua's cries softened. Erica exhaled shakily, watching her son begin to relax. "Is he going to be okay?" Erica asked. Angela placed a reassuring hand on her friend's shoulder. "Yes, he just needs rest and some antibiotics. You caught it early." Angela had just finished updating Erica on Joshua's treatment when the door to the clinic slammed open. She turned sharply, startled. A wiry older man in a trucker cap stood in the doorway, glaring at her. "Where's Doc Viola?" he barked. Angela straightened. "I'm Dr. Carter. Viola was my mother. How can I help you?" The man's eyes narrowed, his weathered face twisting in skepticism. "You're the new doc? Thought you'd be older and different." Angela took a slow breath. "I assure you, I'm fully qualified. What seems to be the issue?" He grunted, holding up his hand, which was wrapped in a grimy bandage. "Got cut working on my rig. Thought maybe Viola, you could patch it up?" Angela gestured toward an exam room. "Come on back. Let me take a look." The man hesitated before following her. In the room, Angela carefully unwrapped the bandage, revealing an inflamed gash on his palm. "This is infected," she said. "I'll clean it and prescribe antibiotics." As Angela worked, the man shifted uncomfortably on the stool. "You any good at this?" he muttered. Angela paused, meeting his eyes. "I've stitched wounds in emergency rooms with twice as much chaos as this. You'll be fine." He grumbled something under his breath, but he didn't argue further. Angela cleaned and sutured the wound with steady hands, ignoring his muttered complaints. By the time she finished, his gruffness had softened. "Not bad," he admitted, flexing his hand. "Thank you," Angela replied evenly. When the man left, Angela leaned against the counter, her confidence shaken but intact. Erica approached her, carrying a now sleeping Joshua. "You handled him well," Erica said. Angela smiled faintly. "Years of practice." Erica hesitated, then said, "You know, not everyone's like him. Some of us are really glad you're here. My son." She glanced at Joshua and swallowed hard. "You saved him today. Thank you." Angela's throat tightened. "That's why I'm here. To help." As Erica left, Angela felt a flicker of warmth. The doubts from earlier still lingered, but Erica's gratitude reminded her why she had returned to Maplewood. That evening, Angela stayed late at the clinic, catching up on paperwork. The quiet was interrupted by the sound of motorcycles rumbling past. She froze, her heart racing. Peeking through the blinds, she saw the iron shadows cruising down Main Street, their engines loud enough to rattle windows. She watched them disappear into the night, unease coiling in her stomach. Though their leader, Scar, had shown no overt hostility, their presence was a looming shadow over the town. Angela tried to shake off the tension, focusing on her work. But as she locked up and headed home, she couldn't ignore the knot of worry forming in her chest. At her small rental house on the outskirts of town, Angela made tea and sank into the worn armchair her mother used to sit in. Viola's journals were stacked on a nearby table, filled with notes about patient care, herbal remedies, and reflections on her years of service. Angela picked up a journal and flipped to a random page. One entry caught her eye. Some people come to you broken, angry, or scared. They may lash out, but beneath that, they're just people in need of kindness. Your job is to see past their anger and help them heal. Angela traced the words with her finger. Her mother had always believed in the power of kindness to disarm even the harshest critics. Angela wanted to believe it too. She closed the journal and looked out the window. The moonlight bathed the quiet streets of Maplewood, casting shadows that danced like whispers of the past. "I'll do my best, Mom," Angela said softly. The next morning, Angela walked to the clinic, her resolve firm. She passed the diner and noticed a small group of townsfolk talking by the window. One of them, a gray-haired woman in an apron, nodded at Angela and offered a hesitant smile. Angela nodded back, feeling a spark of hope. When she reached the clinic, she found another gift on the doorstep, a jar of honey with a handwritten note. "For the new docky, thank you for helping my friend last night. Scar." Angela stared at the note, her emotions swirling. The man who had unnerved her just days ago had offered a gesture of gratitude. It was small but meaningful, a sign that perhaps she was beginning to chip away at the walls around her. As Angela placed the jar on her desk beside the wildflowers, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since arriving in Maplewood. Belonging. The honey jar stayed on Angela's desk beside the bouquet of wildflowers, a peculiar but touching combination of gestures. They were tiny reminders that perhaps Maplewood wasn't as set in its ways as she feared. Still, she remained cautious. Kindness from Scar didn't erase the tension that simmered between the iron shadows and the rest of the town. Angela's days settled into a rhythm. Patients trickled in, some with guarded expressions, others with cautious smiles. She spent her evenings poring over her mother's journals or making small improvements to the clinic. Each task brought a sense of purpose, a step toward honoring Viola's legacy. But Maplewood wasn't as peaceful as it seemed on the surface. Whispers of altercations involving the bikers spread through the town like wildfire. At the grocery store, Angela overheard two farmers discussing an incident where the iron shadows intimidated a shopkeeper. At the diner, patrons grew quiet whenever motorcycles roared past, their faces etched with unease. Angela began to notice more patients with injuries that didn't match their stories. A bruised jaw from falling off a ladder, a gash on a forearm blamed on a fence post. She knew better than to press for the truth, but it gnawed at her. Late one Friday afternoon, Angela treated an elderly patient named Edith Tucker, who had come in for a routine checkup. Edith was chatty and kind, filling the room with stories about her grandchildren and her garden. As Angela wrapped up the exam, the sound of motorcycles echoed in the distance, growing louder until it filled the air like thunder. Edith stiffened, her jovial expression faltering. "They've been out and about all day," Edith said, her voice low. Angela frowned. "The bikers?" Edith nodded. "They were in the market earlier, causing a ruckus. Poor Mr. Bailey tried to stand his ground, but they just laughed at him." Angela sighed, thinking of the growing tension in town. "I'll walk you out, Edith," she said, offering a reassuring smile. Outside, the streets were quiet except for the distant hum of engines. Angela helped Edith into her car, waving as she drove off. As Angela turned back toward the clinic, her eyes caught movement at the edge of Main Street. The iron shadows were gathered outside the diner, their motorcycles gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Liam "Fury" Maddox, the gang's leader, stood at the center of the group, his imposing figure unmistakable. His scarred face and piercing eyes made him look every bit the part of a man accustomed to command. Angela watched as Fury gestured toward the diner, his voice carrying even from a distance. Though she couldn't hear his words, the tension in his posture was clear. A couple of the bikers laughed loudly, drawing nervous glances from the diner patrons inside. Angela hesitated. She wanted to walk away, to retreat to the safety of her clinic. But something stopped her. Fury turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the street and landing on her. For a moment, their eyes locked. Fury's expression was unreadable, a mix of curiosity and defiance. Angela didn't flinch. She held his gaze, her heart pounding but her face calm. After a few seconds, Fury smirked and turned away, gesturing for his gang to follow him. The roar of engines soon faded into the distance, leaving Angela standing alone on the sidewalk. That evening, Angela stayed at the clinic later than usual, organizing supplies and reviewing patient notes. She couldn't shake the image of Fury and the bikers at the diner. There was an unease in the air that made her skin prickle, as if something was brewing just out of sight. As she locked the front door, a voice called out from the shadows. "Doc." Angela turned sharply, her pulse quickening. Scar stepped into the light, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, his tone uncharacteristically subdued. Angela relaxed slightly, but kept her distance. "Ma, what do you need?" Scar scratched the back of his neck. "Just wanted to say thanks for helping my buddy the other night. And for the honey," he added with a faint smirk. Angela crossed her arms. "It's my job to help, but I hope you're not here to intimidate anyone." Scar's smirk faded, replaced by something almost regretful. "That's not why I'm here," he said quietly. "Look, he's got his own way of doing things. I don't always agree, but it's not my place to step in." "Maybe it should be," Angela replied, her voice steady. Scar met her gaze, his expression conflicted. "You're brave, Doc. I'll give you that." He turned to leave but paused. "Be careful out here. Not everyone's as forgiving as you." Angela watched him disappear into the night, her mind racing. There was more to Scar than she had thought, but his warning left her uneasy. The next day, Angela arrived at the clinic early, hoping to shake off the lingering tension from her encounter with Scar. She was halfway through her first appointment when the door burst open and a familiar voice rang out. "Doc, we need you!" Angela turned to see Erica, breathless and pale, clutching Joshua in her arms. The toddler was limp, his face flushed. "He's burning up again," Erica gasped. "He won't wake up." Angela's heart clenched, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Bring him here," she said, guiding Erica into an exam room. Joshua's condition was worse than before. His fever was dangerously high, and his breathing was shallow. Angela worked quickly, administering medication to lower his fever and setting up an oxygen mask to help him breathe. Erica sat in the corner, her hands trembling as she watched Angela work. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't let him. Don't let him." Angela placed a hand on Erica's shoulder. "I won't. He's in good hands." Hours passed in a blur as Angela monitored Joshua, adjusting his treatment as his condition slowly stabilized. By evening, his fever had broken, and his breathing had steadied. "He's going to be okay," Angela said, her voice soft but firm. Erica broke down in sobs, clutching her son tightly. "Thank you, Angela. Thank you." As Angela watched mother and child, she felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. This was why she had returned to be here for people in their moments of need, no matter the challenges she faced. But as the evening settled into stillness, Angela couldn't ignore the unease that lingered. The tension with the iron shadows hadn't disappeared, it had only deepened. And she knew the storm was far from over. The hum of the oxygen mask was the only sound in the room as Angela watched over Joshua and his sleeping mother. Erica's head rested on the edge of the exam table, her hand gently clutching her son's small fingers. The crisis had passed, but the weight of the day lingered heavily on Angela's shoulders. She stepped out into the quiet clinic hallway, rubbing her temples and exhaling deeply. The sharp knock on the clinic door startled her. Glancing at the clock, she realized it was well past midnight. Tension prickled at her skin as she approached the door and peered out through the glass. 3 figures stood in the dim light of the clinic's exterior lamp. Angela's breath caught when she recognized the leather jackets emblazoned with the emblem of the Iron Shadows. She opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" Scar stepped forward, his face serious. Behind him stood 2 other bikers, one clutching his side and grimacing in pain. "He's hurt," Scar said simply, motioning toward the injured man. "Needs stitches." Angela hesitated, the memory of Joshua's fragile state fresh in her mind. She glanced back toward the exam room where Erica and Joshua rested. Then Viola's words echoed in her mind. "We do not choose who needs help." "Come in," she said, stepping aside. The injured biker, whose name was Dean, winced as Angela guided him into an exam room. His shirt was torn, revealing a deep gash on his ribcage. "What happened?" Angela asked, as she snapped on gloves. "Bar fight," Scar answered. Angela glanced at him. "This didn't happen at a bar." Scar held her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Does it matter?" "No," Angela replied evenly. She set to work, cleaning the wound with antiseptic. Dean flinched but didn't protest as Angela's skilled hands moved efficiently. As she stitched the gash, Angela spoke without looking up. "I'm guessing this is connected to what's been happening around town." Scar leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "Not everything's your business, Doc." Angela tied off the last stitch and straightened, meeting his eyes. "It is when it lands on my doorstep." The room fell silent. Dean muttered a thanks as Angela handed him instructions for care and antibiotics. The bikers turned to leave, but Angela called out, stopping them in their tracks. "Wait." Scar turned, raising an eyebrow. "I know you think you're helping your friend," Angela said, her voice calm but firm. "But the way you operate, it's hurting people. It's hurting this town." Scar's smirk faltered. For a moment, his face softened, but the vulnerability vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "You don't know us," he said. Angela stepped closer. "No, but I know this town, and I know that intimidation doesn't make you stronger. It just isolates you." Scar didn't reply. He gave a curt nod and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. The next morning, Angela sat in her office, sipping coffee and replaying the night's events in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that her words had reached Scar at least a little. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Angela opened it to find the mayor of Maplewood, Charles Hadley, standing on the steps. His gray suit and carefully combed hair contrasted sharply with the unkempt chaos of the bikers from the night before. "Mayor Hadley?" Angela greeted, surprised. "Dr. Carter," he said, stepping inside. "I heard about the incident last night. I came to see how you're holding up." Angela frowned. "You heard about that already?" "It's a small town," he said with a wry smile. "Word travels fast." Angela crossed her arms. "I'm fine. My patients come first, no matter who they are." Hadley nodded but hesitated, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. "Dr. Carter, I appreciate your dedication. But these bikers, they're not just a nuisance. They're dangerous. They've caused problems in other towns, and I don't want Maplewood to become their playground." "I understand that," Angela said, her voice measured. "But turning them away when they need help won't solve the problem." Hadley sighed. "Just be careful, Doctor. This town can't afford to lose you." That evening, as Angela closed up the clinic, the sound of motorcycles roared down Main Street again. This time, they didn't stop. Instead, the bikers sped past, their headlights slicing through the darkness. Angela felt a knot of unease form in her stomach. Maplewood wasn't equipped to handle the kind of tension the Iron Shadows were bringing. She worried that the town's already fragile peace would soon shatter. She was about to head home when a loud crash echoed down the street. Angela froze, her pulse quickening. She ran outside and saw a crowd gathering near the diner. A shattered window glinted under the streetlights, and inside, tables and chairs were overturned. The bikers were gone, but the damage was done. Angela's fists clenched as she stepped closer. "What happened?" "It was them," a bystander muttered, gesturing toward the distant hum of motorcycle engines. Angela's heart sank. She didn't want to believe Scar or Dean had been involved, but the evidence was hard to ignore. The next day, Angela visited the diner to check on the owner, Mr. Bailey. The elderly man greeted her with a weary smile, though his hands shook as he poured her a cup of coffee. "Thank you for coming by, Dr. Carter," he said. "I'm sorry about what happened," Angela said, her voice heavy with sympathy. Bailey waved a hand dismissively. "The damage can be fixed. I'm just worried about what they'll do next." Angela hesitated. "They're not all bad. I've seen glimpses of something better in them." Bailey raised an eyebrow. "Glimpses won't keep this town safe." Angela nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. That night, Angela sat in her mother's old armchair, staring at the wildflowers and honey jar on her desk. She thought about Scar's words, about the hesitation she'd seen in his eyes. "Not everyone's beyond saving," she murmured to herself. Angela knew she couldn't change the iron shadows overnight, but she could continue to show them, and the town, that strength came from compassion, not fear. As she drifted off to sleep, a faint sense of hope lingered. The storm wasn't over, but Angela was determined to weather it, no matter what. Angela sat in the dim light of her office, the weight of the week pressing down on her shoulders. The clinic was quiet now, but the memories of the broken diner window, the wary looks from the townsfolk, and Scar's conflicting demeanor refused to fade. Each interaction chipped at her resolve, but it also ignited something deeper, an unwillingness to give up. She reached for one of her mother's journals, thumbing through the worn pages. Viola Carter's looping handwriting filled the margins, recounting patient stories and musings on human nature. One entry stood out. "Sometimes, the hardest hearts crack under the smallest acts of kindness. You may not see the change right away, but the seeds you plant today can grow into something strong tomorrow." Angela closed the journal with a sigh. Her mother had believed in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Could she? The next morning, Angela's routine began as usual. She treated patients, offering her full attention to each person who came through the door. An elderly farmer with arthritis, a teacher with a persistent cough. But the tension outside the clinic was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Just before noon, Angela's receptionist, Marie, peeked into her office. "There's someone here to see you, Dr. Carter. It's Scar." Angela's pen paused mid-signature. "Send him in," she said evenly, though her pulse quickened. Scar stepped into the office, his usual smirk absent. His eyes darted around the room as if he were uncomfortable being there. "Thanks for seeing me," he muttered, sinking into the chair across from Angela's desk. "What can I do for you?" Angela asked, keeping her tone neutral. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I came to apologize for what happened at the diner." Angela raised an eyebrow. "You were there?" "No," Scar said quickly. "But Fury and the others were. I didn't know what they were planning." Angela leaned forward. "And if you had known, would you have stopped them?" Scar's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple. Fury's the leader. We don't question him." "Maybe you should," Angela said, her voice firm but calm. "You can't keep looking the other way while people get hurt." Scar let out a frustrated sigh. "It's easy for you to say. You don't know what it's like to owe someone like Fury." Angela softened, sensing the cracks in his armor. "Then tell me. Help me understand." Scar hesitated, then began to speak. His voice was low, hesitant, as if each word carried a weight he'd been holding for years. He told Angela about his troubled past, how he'd fallen in with the Iron Shadows after losing his family. how Fury had taken him in when no one else would. Back then, I thought being part of the gang meant loyalty, Scar admitted. But now, I'm not so sure. Angela listened, her expression unreadable. When Scar finished, the room fell silent. You can still change, Angela said finally. You don't have to stay on this path. Scar chuckled bitterly. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, Angela said. But it's worth it. And it starts with small choices. Scar looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. You really believe that? I do, Angela replied, her voice steady. Scar nodded slowly. Thanks, Doc, for listening. He stood, hesitating at the door. Take care of yourself. Fury doesn't like people standing up to him. Angela watched him leave, her heart heavy. Scar's words were a warning, but they also carried a glimmer of hope. That evening, Angela walked through the streets of Maplewood, her thoughts preoccupied. She stopped by the diner to check on Mr. Bailey, who was sweeping up glass shards. Need a hand? Angela offered. Mr. Bailey smiled wearily. I wouldn't say no. Together, they worked in silence, clearing the broken glass and rearranging chairs. As they finished, Mr. Bailey looked at Angela with gratitude. Thank you, Doctor, he said. You didn't have to help. Angela shrugged. Sometimes, it's the small things that make a difference. Mr. Bailey's expression grew serious. This town's lucky to have you. I hope you know that. Angela's throat tightened. I'm just doing my best. Later that night, Angela sat by her window, the wildflowers and honey jar catching the moonlight. She thought about Scar's confession, the tension in the town, and her mother's words about planting seeds of kindness. The sound of engines broke the stillness. Angela tensed, watching as the iron shadows rolled through town. This time, they didn't stop. She watched them disappear into the darkness, her mind racing. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain, she wasn't backing down. Angela woke the next morning to the familiar sound of birds chirping outside her window. But the weight of Scar's words lingered. Fury doesn't like people standing up to him. The warning wasn't lost on her, but neither was the faint crack of doubt she'd seen in Scar's demeanor. She spent the morning immersed in her work, finding solace in the routine of patient care. A sprained ankle here, a sinus infection there. These were the simple, solvable problems that kept her grounded. But by afternoon, the quiet predictability began to shift. Marie, her receptionist, poked her head into Angela's office. Dr. Carter, someone's asking for you at the front. He says it's urgent. Angela stood and followed Marie to the waiting room. There, a young man in a grease-stained flannel shirt paced nervously, his face pale. You're Dr. Carter? He asked, his voice tight with panic. Yes, Angela said, her tone steady. What's going on? It's my brother, the man said. He got into a fight with those bikers, and now he's hurt bad. He's at the auto shop. Can you come? Angela's chest tightened. Why didn't you call an ambulance? The man shook his head. He said no cops, no hospitals. Please, Doc, he needs help. Angela hesitated, glancing at Marie. Cancel my afternoon appointments. Tell them I'll reschedule. Marie's brow furrowed with concern. Are you sure you should go alone? Angela nodded. I'll be fine. The auto shop was on the edge of town, a small building surrounded by rusting cars and stacks of tires. Angela parked and stepped out, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. Inside, the air smelled of oil and sweat. A man lay on a makeshift cot in the corner, clutching his ribs and groaning in pain. Blood stained his shirt. Let me see, Angela said, kneeling beside him. He grimaced, but didn't protest, as Angela lifted his shirt to examine the deep bruises and cuts across his torso. This could be serious, Angela said. You might have internal bleeding. You need to go to a hospital. No hospitals, the man rasped, his voice firm despite his pain. Angela's jaw tightened, but she respected his wishes. She worked quickly, cleaning and stitching his wounds, all the while trying to push down her growing frustration. "What happened?" she asked as she wrapped his ribs. The man hesitated, then muttered, "It was Fury. He came in here looking for payment, said we owed him for protection." Angela froze, anger rising in her chest. "And when you couldn't pay?" "He made an example of me," the man said bitterly. Angela's hands stilled for a moment before she finished securing the bandages. "You shouldn't have to live like this," she said quietly. The man didn't reply, but the weariness in his eyes said enough. As Angela drove back to the clinic, her mind raced. Fury's actions were escalating, and the town was caught in the crossfire. She thought of Scar's warning, of the cracks she'd seen in his loyalty. If anyone could challenge Fury from within the gang, it might be him. When she arrived at the clinic, Marie was waiting, her expression tight with worry. "Everything okay?" Angela nodded, though her heart felt heavy. "I did what I could. He'll recover." Marie hesitated, then said, "There's been talk around town. People are scared, Angela. They're wondering how long it'll be before someone gets hurt worse." Angela's throat tightened. She didn't have an answer for that, but she knew she couldn't let fear paralyze her. That evening, Angela sat in her office, staring at the wildflowers and honey jar on her desk. She thought about her mother's journals, about the lessons Viola had passed down to her. When people are at their worst, that's when they need you the most. Angela closed her eyes, the memory of Viola's voice steadying her resolve. She couldn't turn away, no matter how daunting the challenges ahead seemed. The following day, Angela was treating a patient when Scar appeared at the clinic door. He looked uncharacteristically tense, his usual swagger replaced with hesitation. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Angela led him into her office, closing the door behind them. Scar paced the room, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. "I heard about what happened at the auto shop," he said. "Fury's losing control. He's been getting more aggressive and people are starting to question him." Angela folded her arms. "Including you?" Scar stopped pacing and met her gaze. "Maybe," he admitted, "but going against Fury isn't that simple. He's dangerous." Angela stepped closer. "Scar, you've seen what his actions are doing to this town. If you don't stand up to him, who will?" Scar's jaw tightened. "It's not that easy, Doc. Loyalty runs deep in our world." "So does regret," Angela said softly. Scar looked away, his shoulders slumping. For a moment, the room was silent. Then he said, "I don't know if I can do it alone." Angela placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to, but it starts with you deciding what kind of man you want to be." Scar left the clinic without saying much more, but Angela could see the turmoil in his expression. She watched him walk down the street, his figure disappearing into the shadows. That night, Angela sat by her window, watching the lights of Maplewood flicker in the distance. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she felt a faint glimmer of hope. Scar's loyalty to Fury might not have broken yet, but it was cracking. And cracks, Angela knew, were where the light got in. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, the kind of weather that pressed on Angela's mood like a weight. She arrived at the clinic early, hoping the quiet hours before patients arrived would give her time to reflect. Scar's words from the night before still echoed in her mind. "I don't know if I can do it alone." Angela had seen something shift in him, a sliver of doubt in Fury, a seed of willingness to change. But seeds needed care to grow, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Scar was running out of time to make a choice. The day began quietly. Angela moved through her appointments with methodical focus, tending to patients with everything from seasonal colds to aching joints. By mid-afternoon, Erica came by with Joshua in tow, the boy now bright-eyed and giggling. "I just wanted to say thank you again," Erica said, her smile warm. "Joshua wouldn't be running around like this if it weren't for you." Angela knelt beside the toddler, who reached out to tug her sleeve. "He's looking great." You've done a good job keeping him hydrated. Erica hesitated. There's something else. She leaned in, lowering her voice. I overheard some people talking about what you did for that man at the auto shop. Not everyone agrees with it, but I do. You're showing us what it means to care, even for those we're scared of. Angela straightened, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. It's not always easy, Erica. I know, Erica said, but it's worth it. The afternoon passed uneventfully, and Angela was starting to think the day might end peacefully. But just as she was locking the clinic door, the unmistakable rumble of motorcycles filled the air. She turned to see a single bike pull up. It was Scar, his jacket soaked from the drizzle that had begun to fall. He dismounted, his movements tense, and walked toward her. We need to talk, he said. Angela unlocked the door and ushered him inside, leading him to her office. Scar paced as he spoke, his words tumbling out in a rush. Fury's planning something big, he said. He's angry about people questioning him, and he wants to send a message. I think he's going after the diner again. Angela's stomach dropped. When? Tonight, Scar said. I didn't come here to warn you so you'd call the cops. I came because I don't want to be part of it. Angela crossed her arms. Then don't. Walk away. Scar stopped pacing and looked at her, frustration etched across his face. You think it's that simple? You don't just walk away from someone like Fury. He'll come after me. Angela's voice softened. Then stand up to him. Show the others they can too. Scar hesitated, his shoulders slumping. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are, Angela said firmly, and you won't be alone. Scar gave her a long look, then nodded once. Thanks, Doc. He turned to leave, then paused. You know, you're probably the only person in this town who doesn't look at me like I'm a lost cause. Angela smiled faintly. That's because I don't believe in lost causes. That evening, Angela couldn't shake her unease. Scar's warning had set her on edge, and the thought of Fury targeting the diner again filled her with dread. She debated calling the authorities, but knew it might only escalate things further. Instead, she grabbed her coat and headed toward Main Street. The diner was quiet when she arrived, its lights glowing warmly against the darkening sky. Mr. Bailey was inside, wiping down the counter. Angela tapped on the glass, and he looked up, his brow furrowing in surprise. Dr. Carter, he said as she stepped inside. What brings you here so late? I heard there might be trouble tonight, Angela said carefully. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Bailey sighed, setting his rag down. You're a good person, Doctor, but you can't fix everything. Angela met his gaze. Maybe not, but I can try. Before Bailey could respond, the sound of motorcycles pierced the quiet. Angela's heart sank as the iron shadows roared into view, their headlights cutting through the rain. Fury led the pack, his imposing figure unmistakable even from a distance. The bikers parked haphazardly along the curb, their engines rumbling as they dismounted. Fury strode toward the diner, his expression dark. Stay inside, Angela said to Bailey. She stepped out onto the sidewalk, the rain soaking her coat as she faced Fury. What do you think you're doing? She asked, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. Fury smirked, his scar twisting with the movement. This doesn't concern you, Doc. It does when it affects this town, Angela said. Fury stepped closer, his tone mocking. You're brave, standing out here all by yourself, but bravery won't save you if you get in my way. I'm not afraid of you, Angela said, holding his gaze. The tension crackled in the air, thick and suffocating. Fury opened his mouth to reply, but a voice interrupted him. Leave her alone. Angela turned to see Scar stepping forward, his shoulders squared and his expression resolute. The other bikers exchanged surprised glances, murmuring among themselves. Fury's eyes narrowed. You've got something to say, Scar? Scar didn't waver. Yeah, I do. This isn't what we're about. And if you want to tear this town apart, you'll have to do it without me." The murmurs grew louder, and Angela saw uncertainty flicker across Fury's face. He glanced at the other bikers, some of whom were shifting uneasily. "You think you can just walk away?" Fury snarled. "I think it's time someone did," Scar said. Fury stepped closer, but before he could make another move, one of the other bikers spoke up. "Maybe Scar's right, Fury. This is going too far." Fury froze, his anger palpable. For a moment, it seemed like he might lash out, but then he turned on his heel and stalked back to his bike. "Let's go," he barked. One by one, the bikers followed, leaving Scar standing in the rain. Angela watched the group disappear into the night, her heart pounding. She turned to Scar, who stood motionless, his face unreadable. "You did the right thing," she said softly. Scar glanced at her, then nodded. "Maybe." He paused, then added, "Thanks, Doc, for believing in me." Angela smiled faintly. Sometimes that's all it takes. As she walked back to the clinic, Angela felt a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. The storm wasn't over, but something had shifted. And for the first time in weeks, she felt like the seeds of change were starting to take root. The rain had stopped by the time Angela reached her clinic, but the weight of the evening still clung to her. She sat at her desk, staring at the wildflowers and honey jar. Scar's defiance of Fury replayed in her mind. It had been an unexpected act of courage, one that Angela hoped might inspire more change than Fury could undo. But she knew better than to assume the storm had passed. Fury was unpredictable, and his bruised pride made him dangerous. Scar's decision to stand up to him was a crack in the foundation of the Iron Shadows, but cracks could either grow into fractures or be patched over. The next day, Maplewood buzzed with quiet whispers about what had happened outside the diner. Angela overheard pieces of conversations as she passed through town, fragments of hope and apprehension. Scar stood up to Fury. "Can you believe it? Maybe things are changing." "Yeah, but Fury isn't the kind to just let that slide." Angela spent the morning tending to her patients, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Scar. She hadn't seen or heard from him since the confrontation, and worry gnawed at the edges of her resolve. She knew he had taken a risk, a dangerous one. By mid-afternoon, Angela was finishing up a checkup for a young boy when Marie appeared in the doorway, her face tight with concern. "Dr. Carter," she said quietly, "you've got a visitor. It's Scar." Angela nodded, quickly wrapping up her notes and stepping into the waiting area. Scar was there, leaning against the wall, his jacket damp from the lingering drizzle outside. "Come in," Angela said, leading him to her office. Scar sank into the chair across from her desk, his usual confidence replaced by weariness. "You okay?" Angela asked, sitting down. Scar let out a hollow laugh. "You mean after telling Fury to shove it?" "Not exactly." Angela leaned forward, her voice soft. "What happened?" Scar rubbed his face with his hands. "Fury's furious. He said I betrayed him, that I embarrassed him in front of the others. I barely got out of there without a fight." "But you did get out," Angela said. "Yeah," Scar muttered. "And now I don't know what's next. I've got no place in the gang anymore." Fury made that clear. Angela studied him, her heart heavy with both sympathy and hope. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," she said gently. Scar looked up at her, his expression torn. "You don't get it, Doc. The gang was all I had. It gave me a purpose, a family, even if it came with a price." Angela nodded slowly. "I do get it, but you're more than the choices you've made. You stood up for what was right. That took strength, Scar, and it means you can start fresh." Scar shook his head. "It's not that simple." "Maybe not," Angela agreed, "but you don't have to do it alone. There are people in this town who would help you, if you let them." Scar's eyes softened, the tension in his posture easing just slightly. "Why do you care so much?" Angela smiled faintly. "Because someone once believed in me when I didn't think I was worth it. I'm just paying it forward." Scar left the clinic not long after, his steps heavy, but his shoulders squared. Angela watched him disappear down the street, hoping he'd find the strength to keep moving forward. That evening, Angela received an unexpected knock on her door. When she opened it, Erica stood on the porch, her expression filled with nervous energy. "Angela, I don't know if you've heard, but there's a meeting at the town hall tonight. People are talking about what happened with Fury and Scar. They're scared, but they're also hopeful. They want to talk about what we can do as a community." Angela's heart lifted. "I'll be there," she said. The town hall was packed when Angela arrived, the buzz of conversation filling the room. She spotted familiar faces, Erica, Mr. Bailey, the mayor, and was surprised to see how many people had turned out. Mayor Hadley stepped to the front of the room, raising his hands for quiet. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We're here to discuss what's been happening in our town. The Iron Shadows have been a problem for too long, and last night's confrontation at the diner has made it clear that we need to act." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Dr. Carter," Hadley continued, "you've had more interactions with the bikers than most of us. What do you think we should do?" Angela hesitated, the weight of the room's attention pressing down on her. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Last night, we saw something important," she said. "Scar, one of the Iron Shadows, stood up to Fury. He took a risk to show that even in a world built on intimidation and fear, change is possible." The room fell silent, everyone hanging on her words. "But change doesn't happen in a vacuum," Angela continued. "It takes all of us. We need to show people like Scar that there's a place for them here if they choose a better path. We need to stand together as a community, not just against the Iron Shadows, but for each other." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Erica stood and said, "Angela's right. If we want things to change, we have to be part of the solution." One by one, others in the room nodded, their resolve growing. After the meeting, Angela stood outside the town hall, the cool night air a welcome relief. Erica joined her, smiling. "You have a way of inspiring people," Erica said. Angela chuckled softly. "I just said what needed to be said." Erica's smile widened. "That's what makes it powerful." As Angela looked out over the quiet streets of Maplewood, she felt a flicker of hope. The tide was beginning to turn, and for the first time, it felt like the town was ready to fight for its future, not with violence, but with unity and courage. The town hall meeting had left Angela with a cautious sense of optimism. For the first time since returning to Maplewood, she saw the town beginning to rally not just against the Iron Shadows, but for one another. It was a subtle shift, but one that could make all the difference. The morning after, Angela busied herself at the clinic, seeing patients and reviewing her schedule. Though her outward focus was on her work, her thoughts lingered on Scar. She hadn't seen him since their conversation, and a quiet worry tugged at her mind. By early afternoon, her concerns were answered when Scar walked into the clinic. His shoulders were hunched, and his expression was conflicted. Angela set down her clipboard and gestured for him to follow her into the office. Scar sank into the chair across from her desk, running a hand through his hair. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept. "Everything okay?" Angela asked gently. He let out a hollow laugh. "That's a loaded question." Angela waited, giving him the space to speak. Finally, he sighed and said, "I'm done with Fury, with the Iron Shadows. I told him last night, and he didn't take it well." Angela's heart quickened. "What happened?" Scar leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "He threatened me, of course, said I'd regret walking away, but I stood my ground. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was living on my own terms." Angela smiled faintly. "That's a big step, Scar. I'm proud of you." Scar shook his head. "I don't know if it'll mean anything. Fury's not going to let this go. And the others, they're still under his thumb. But you're not, Angela said. And that's how change starts, one person at a time. Later that evening, Angela returned home, the exhaustion of the day settling into her bones. As she made tea, she thought about Scar's decision and the courage it had taken. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes you won't see the full impact of what you've done, but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing. Angela carried her tea to the window, gazing out at the quiet streets of Maplewood. The moonlight bathed the town in a silvery glow, and for a moment, she allowed herself to hope that Scar's choice might inspire others. The following day, Angela arrived at the clinic to find a small crowd gathered outside. Her heart sank, fearing the worst. But as she approached, she realized these weren't angry townsfolk, they were volunteers. Erica stepped forward, holding a box of supplies. "We thought you could use some help fixing up the clinic," she said, grinning. Angela blinked, her surprise giving way to a wave of gratitude. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Erica said with a laugh. Angela nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, thank you." For the next few hours, the group worked together, painting the clinic's exterior, repairing squeaky doors, and planting flowers along the walkway. As Angela watched the townsfolk labor with smiles and laughter, a sense of belonging settled over her. One by one, they told her how her words at the town hall had inspired them. Mr. Bailey recounted how he'd decided to stand up to the bikers if they ever returned. A young teacher spoke about organizing a community watch program. Even the mayor admitted he was considering stricter ordinances to protect local businesses. The energy was contagious, and Angela felt a spark of hope reignite. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in golden light, Scar appeared at the clinic. His arrival drew quiet murmurs from the crowd, but Angela greeted him warmly. "Glad you came," she said. Scar nodded, his expression hesitant. "I heard what you said at the town hall. You're making waves, Doc." Angela smiled. "It's not just me, it's everyone." Scar glanced at the volunteers, then back at Angela. "I don't know if I belong here, but I want to try, if that's okay." Angela placed a hand on his shoulder. "Of course it's okay. Change isn't about where you've been, it's about where you're going." As the volunteers wrapped up and the crowd dispersed, Angela lingered outside with Scar. The night air was cool, the stars beginning to peek through the darkening sky. "I can't believe you've got this whole town listening to you," Scar said, his voice tinged with admiration. Angela chuckled. "I think they just needed someone to remind them what they're capable of." Scar's expression grew serious. "I needed that reminder too. Thank you." Angela looked at him, her voice soft. "You reminded me of something too, that it's never too late to make a different choice." As Scar walked away into the night, Angela stood in the quiet, her heart full. Redemption wasn't a straight path, but it was possible for Scar, for the town, and even for herself. The storm that had loomed over Maplewood was beginning to clear, and Angela felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was exactly where she needed to be. Angela stepped outside the clinic early that morning, the air crisp and carrying the faint scent of dew-soaked earth. The golden glow of the sunrise stretched across Maplewood, casting long shadows over the buildings. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to fully take in the beauty of her small hometown. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was beginning to feel like home again. The memories of the town hall meeting, the volunteers fixing up the clinic, and Scar's quiet determination still lingered in her mind. Each moment had been a thread in a larger tapestry, weaving the story of a community learning to stand together. Angela glanced down at the flowers lining the clinic's walkway. The newly planted blooms, their colors vibrant and hopeful, mirrored the shift she felt in the town. By mid-morning, the clinic was buzzing with activity. Patients trickled in, their greetings warmer than before. People who once avoided her gaze now offered smiles and even small talk. Angela moved from room to room, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. As she finished a routine exam for a young girl, Erica appeared in the doorway, Joshua toddling at her side. "Hey, Angela," Erica said. "Got a minute?" Angela smiled. "For you? Always." They stepped into the office, and Erica set Joshua down on the rug. He immediately busied himself with a toy Angela kept in the corner. "I just wanted to say thank you," Erica began, her voice sincere. "Not just for Joshua, but for everything you've done for this town. You've shown us what it means to care even for people we were ready to write off." Angela's throat tightened. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "It's been all of us." Erica nodded. "Still, you lit the spark. Don't forget that." Later that afternoon, Angela received an unexpected visitor. The soft jingle of the clinic's bell made her look up from her desk. Standing in the doorway was Scar, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. "Scar," Angela said, surprised. "Everything okay?" He shrugged, stepping inside. "Yeah, just thought I'd stop by. Wanted to tell you something." Angela set down her pen and leaned forward. "I'm listening." Scar hesitated, then said, "I've been talking to some of the guys. A couple of them are thinking about leaving the Iron Shadows. Fury's grip on the gang is slipping." Angela's eyebrows lifted. "That's good news." Scar nodded, but didn't meet her gaze. "Yeah, but it's messy. Some of them are scared to leave, and I don't blame them. Fury's not the kind of guy you cross lightly." Angela's voice softened. "You're giving them something they didn't have before, an example. That's powerful, Scar." Scar glanced up at her, his expression a mix of doubt and gratitude. "Maybe. I hope it's enough." "It will be," Angela said firmly. Scar gave her a faint smile, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. "Thanks, Doc, for everything." That evening, Angela stood outside the clinic, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The streets of Maplewood were quiet, but there was a sense of calm rather than tension. She thought of her mother, of Viola's unwavering belief in the goodness of people, even when it was buried deep. Angela had spent much of her life trying to live up to that legacy, but now she realized something important. Her mother's strength wasn't just in her actions, it was in her ability to inspire others to act. And Angela had begun to do the same. In the weeks that followed, the changes in Maplewood became more apparent. The Iron Shadow's presence diminished as more members quietly drifted away, emboldened by Scar's decision. Fury, isolated and outnumbered, eventually left town without fanfare. The community continued to rally together, organizing events, supporting local businesses, and rebuilding what fear had once fractured. The town wasn't perfect, but it was healing. Angela's clinic thrived, becoming more than just a place for medical care. It became a symbol of what was possible when people came together. On a crisp autumn morning, Angela stood at the edge of town, gazing at the rolling hills beyond. She felt a deep sense of peace, one that had eluded her for so long. Erica's car pulled up beside her, and the window rolled down. "You coming?" Erica called. Angela smiled and climbed into the passenger seat. They were headed to a community meeting to discuss a new initiative, a mentoring program for at-risk youth, inspired by Scar's journey. As the car drove down the winding road, Angela looked back at Maplewood, her heart full. She had come home unsure of her place, unsure if she could make a difference. But now she knew. The power to heal wasn't just in her hands, it was in the heart of the community she had helped to rebuild. The story of Maplewood's transformation was far from over. The quiet town had faced its challenges, but through perseverance and a shared commitment to change, it had begun to thrive. Angela Carter had returned uncertain of her place, but she left a mark on the community that no one could deny. Standing in front of the clinic on a brisk morning, Angela watched as townsfolk bustled about. greeting one another with smiles and warmth. A new garden was being planted outside the diner, with Erica and a group of volunteers laughing as they worked. Scar, now a familiar face in town, helped load supplies for a mentoring program he had helped organize. Angela took a deep breath, the crisp air filling her lungs. Her journey back to Maplewood hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. As the camera pans out over the town, Angela's voice echoes, "Every small act of kindness, every decision to stand up for what's right, creates a ripple effect. Together, we can build something better, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us." If Angela's story of perseverance, kindness, and hope resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Angela's shoes? How can we show kindness in our own communities? Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like this story and subscribe to our channel for more inspirational tales of resilience, growth, and the power of community. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Together, let's celebrate the strength within us all and the power of unity. Thank you for being part of our community. Remember, every small action makes a big difference. Stay kind, stay hopeful, and we'll see you in the next story.